Check. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. How y'all doing this evening? You good? You feeling good? All right. My name is Michaela, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Sankofa, both in person and to everyone who's watching virtually. Thank you so much for being here again. We have a very special evening during this Black Women's History Month at Sankofa. Today, we are presenting Black Women as Revolutionaries, an evening with Amy Jacques Garvey, who was such a phenomenal woman, and she gets overlooked so much in history. We know her as like one of the wives of the second wife of Marcus Garvey, but we don't talk about her impact on humanity, on the Black world, and on the UNIA and how far her reach was. But someone who has done that research and who goes on to talk about her impact is Sheila Brown, who will be doing an interpretation of her work and reading this evening. And we're just so blessed and pleased that she could be here. And it's something you should really witness. It's so special watching her perform and really embody the person that she's speaking about or reciting from. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Ms. Sheila Brown. Thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So the year is 1925, October in fact, and we are going to do a little bit of time traveling today. Y'all with me for some time travel? Okay, so this is a very special year for a woman who I passionately and emotionally and spiritually refer to as Queen Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. Now, just to clarify, we know that Jacques is a French word, would be pronounced Jacques, right? But we're talking about Jamaica. And I had the privilege of being raised by a Jamaican stepfather and being in the presence of his mother, my step-grandmother. And she would never say, Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. She would say, Amy Jacques Garvey. And from my research and from all of the interactions that I've had with historians and people who know, she also preferred to be called Amy Jacques Garvey. So that being said, you will hear various expressions of her name being used by different people depending on where they fit within the spectrum of her experience. And so today, I would first like to ask permission from my elder to speak. Any elder in the room?
I'm only 22.
It's spiritual elder. How old is your spirit, though?
About 999.
Okay, I think that qualifies. Thank you so much. And so anyone can have, I would have responded positively to anyone who had suggested that it was okay to speak. But that's a tradition in the African family, and so I wanted to honor that. Because what we're talking about is a woman who embodied the principles and values of Africa in every way. And she would have certainly have appreciated having permission from a wise Black elder woman to speak. And so I want to share with you some really powerful, possibly enlightening insights about this woman who has become a total obsession for me. A woman who I feel ashamed that I don't talk about her as much as she deserves to be talked about, and a woman that I will be forever indebted to for her contributions and for blessing me in some respects with some kind of supernatural insights about what she was saying to us in her writings, if you will. And I'll let you be the judge of that. That's just my perspective on it. But there have been some really powerful clues about world history, about relationships between Black women and Black men, about relationship dynamics between power, the asymmetrical race dynamic power between global world powers, European colonial powers, and the African colonies and the West Caribbean colonies that they have inhabited in here. Of course, the colonies that we inhabited in the ghettos and in the South and in the rural areas, and now all over the United States. And so she was deeply concerned about all of these issues. And she was more concerned about women of African descent and their role, their life, their quality of life, their capacity for leadership, and their capacity for voicing their concerns, not just in relationship to white women, Asian women, women from the Middle East, not just in relationship to white men, Asian men, but of course, with her relationship with her own man, her own child, male child, and her own male colleagues. And so you'll see these themes. In fact, I would argue that Queen Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey is probably the most prolific, if not most significant woman of the 20th century. And I say that knowing that there have been very little Black history programs dedicated to her, even the UNIA, in their various personifications throughout the world, do not give her the kind of respect that she deserves. And I hope that after this presentation, you won't be making that same mistake. So let me just get on with why I believe that that is the case. Because, you know, part of why I'm so passionate about her is that she emotes to me, right? The things that she says bothers me sometimes. Sometimes I have to put down her books and say, Queen Mother, did you just say that? And then sometimes I am so inspired that I feel like I need to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and write something important, right? And so I've written some articles. I've been fortunately invited to speak about some of the things that I've observed and heard and read and gleaned from her writings and from her many speeches. A lot of people don't realize that she was a major speaker, and she was a prolific speaker during her time. In fact, she had the privilege of not only stepping in for her husband when he was incapacitated and unable to speak for himself, but she was invited to speak before some of the finest European ladies in London. And they themselves declared her the most important Negro woman of her race. Okay, so we are going to dive into why Queen Mother Euphemia Jacques Garvey had you on her mind in 1925 in October. And so I want to talk about something she was writing on this particular day in October 4th. She was thinking deeply about women in leadership, women as powerful advocates for social, political, economic, and racial justice. And so she said, the exigencies of this present age require that women take their places beside their men. White women are rallying all their forces and uniting regardless of national boundaries to save their race from destruction and preserve its ideals for posterity. White men have begun to realize that as women are the backbone of the home, so can they, by their economic experience and their aptitude for details, participate effectively in guiding the destiny of nation and race. No line of endeavor remains closed for long to the modern woman. She agitates for equal opportunity and gets them. She makes good on the job and gains the respect of men who heretofore opposed her. She is not afraid of hard work. And by being independent, she gets more out of a present day husband than her grandmother did in the good old days. The women of the East, both yellow and black, are slowly but surely imitating the women of the Western world. And as white women are bolstering up a decaying white civilization. Even so, women of the darker races are sallying forth to help their men establish a civilization according to their own standards and to strive for world leadership. Women of all climes and races have as great a part to play in the development of their particular group as the men. Now, some readers may not agree with us on this issue, but do they not raise their children, the future men and women? Even before birth, a woman can so direct her thoughts and conduct as to bring into the world either a genius or an idiot. Imagine the early years of contact between woman and child, when she directs his form of speech and is responsible for his conduct and deportment. Many a man has risen from the depths of poverty and obscurity and made his mark in life, due to the standing of a good mother whose influence guided his footsteps throughout his life. Women, therefore, are extending this holy influence outside of the realm of the home, softening the ills of the world with their gracious and kindly contact. Now, some men may argue that the home will become broken up and women will become coarse and lose their gentle appeal. But we do not think so, because everything can be done with moderation. The dull baby kind of woman is a thing of the past. The wide awake woman is forging ahead, prepared for all emergencies and ready to answer any call, even if it be to face the cannon on the battlefield. New York. New York has a woman Secretary of State. 2 states have women governors, and we would not be surprised if within the next 10 years a woman graces the White House in Washington, D.C. Women are also filling diplomatic positions, and from time immemorial, women have been used as spies to get information for their countries. Now, white women have greater opportunity to display their ability due to the standing of both races and due to the fact that black men are less appreciative of their women than white men. The former will more readily sing the praises of white women than their own. Yet, who is more deserving of admiration than the black woman? She who has endured the rigors of slavery, the deprivations consequent on a pulverized race, and the indignities heaped upon a weak and defenseless people. Yet she suffers all with fortitude and stands ever ready to help in the onward march to freedom and power. Be not discouraged, black women of the world, but push forward regardless of the lack of appreciation shown you. A race must be saved, a country must be redeemed, and unless you strengthen the leadership of vacillating Negro leaders, we will remain marking time until the yellow race gains leadership of the world and we be forced to subservience under them or extermination. We are tired. We are tired of hearing Negro leaders say, "There's a better day coming," while they do nothing to usher in that day. We are becoming so impatient that we are rushing to the front ranks and serve notice on the world that we will brush aside the halting, cowardly Negro leaders, and with prayer on our lips and arms prepared for any fray, we will press on till victory is over. Africa must be for Africans, and Negroes everywhere must be independent, God being our guide. Mr. Black Man, watch your step. Ethiopia's queens will reign again, and her Amazons protect her shores and people. Strengthen your shaking knees and move forward, or we will displace you and lead on to victory and to glory. That was Women as Leaders. Yes. That was Women as Leaders, and that was an article that was on her mind that manifested as an article or topic that she wrote in 1925 in October. And that became an article that was published in her women's page, an editorial inside of the publication that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, may he rest in power and peace, that he published for the entire global African family. A newspaper that was so powerful that it could get you killed in certain African and West Indian colonies. It was like the cocaine of today. It had to be smuggled into territories because it was such a threat, sometimes translated in Portuguese and Spanish, and everywhere this newspaper fed the nutrients into the cellular rejuvenation of African people, giving them a sense of power and hope, a sense of pride and self-determination that they had never heard before. Their Black Messiah had arrived. And with them came her husband, Marcus Messiah Garvey, for those who didn't catch that. Well, I say that because what I have discovered is that there's a balance in this world system. And the balance looks like inside and outside, seen and unseen, heard and unheard, visible and invisible. And oftentimes this dynamic represents itself in the feminine and masculine of our global leaders, right? And so because Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey was solely devoted, both in his lifetime and after his death, to perpetuating the message of her husband. Now, I've heard a lot of people refer to Queen Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey as a feminist, and that might not seem like a very feminist role to take. And so I would proffer to you that, like many other scholars have suggested, she wasn't exactly a feminist in the sense that you think of feminism. Like many women of her time, they had to balance the need for gender issues with the need for racial issues. And always racial issues were clear to them was the hierarchy in the paradigm. But at the same time, there were these horrible and glaring contradictions that while we must fight for racial freedom, we are still struggling in many respects with respect, with having our needs met as women. And so throughout her writings, and there were over 220 articles that you can find published over the 4 to 5 year period from 1923 to 1927, when she published the Woman's Page of the Negro World. Aside from that, she had her own special writings. She was a very creative woman, and so sometimes she wrote poems and short stories, and sometimes you could hear them incorporated into some of the speeches that I'm going to share with you today, some of her writings. She was, up until she wrote the book Garvey and Garveyism, which all of the big wigs quote from today. I'm talking about all the Black leaders who stand on the podium and give you the history of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey from his birth up to his death, all the intimate details about perhaps his childhood and perhaps the way in which the parents prepared him to develop into the leader that he was, the insights about him being a Leo and his father's declaration of his name being Marcus after him, but the mother's desire to resonate with this sense that this was much more than a regular Black man that she had given birth to, that this was a Moses in a way, a leader out of the desert. And so the compromise was, yeah, you can call him Marcus for your own legacy, but I will also call him Moses, but it will be Marcus Messiah Garvey. And so this name, this powerful name, was certainly indices of what his life work would do. And so while this young man was on his journey from the early age of 8, declaring his space in the world, fighting with the young boys to show who was the strongest, who had the most manhood in him, who had the biggest voice, and realizing that he was in a world that didn't deal with him justly. And he started to realize and look out at the ocean in his spare time when he wasn't sneaking into his father's library to read some of these mysterious and intriguing books. His father was a very intriguing man, very complex man, who left him both inspired and puzzled, emotionally void in many respects. But then you have this amazing mother, this amazing entrepreneur. She could take sugar and coconut and make candies and sell them and make sure he got to school and got shoes. And so he was seeing this divine, compassionate, soft hand that Queen Mother Amy referred to in her writing Women as Leaders as the gentle hand that will soften the ills of the world with their gracious and kindly contact. She's referring to his mother and the work that she did to undo some of the damage that daddy did, leaving him as a very young child inside of a grave overnight to learn the hard lesson that you may not trust anyone, not even me, if you want to survive this world. And so crying inside of that dark, scary tomb, wondering why him, his mother was praying. His mother was doing the intercessory work. His mother was creating the salve to heal his soul. And so he had this amazing dynamic between the gentle, loving, entrepreneurial, intelligent, gorgeous mother and the stirred, hard leader and disciplinarian of his father. All of these things worked together to create the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, a man who lived 40 years, 40 profound years, and had the most dynamic impact on an entire race of people, whether on the continent of Africa or in the Caribbean or in the United States or in Southern America. No matter where Black people were in 1920s, you knew the name Garvey. And you either feared it or reviled it, but there was no neutrality. X.W.E.B. Du Bois. And so, interestingly, while he's around 8 years old, something happens in the universe. There's a woman by the name of Charlotte and a man by the name of George Samuel Jacques, who are inside of their home on December 31st, 1895, arguably 1896, depending on which scholar you ask. And they're there pacing if you're the father and pushing if you're the mother. They were giving birth to the second half of the formula that would solve a global problem of racial oppression and racial division. And her name was Amy Jacques. And this amazing starlight princess would come into the world with a powerful set of tools at her disposal. From the time she was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, her father, who probably wanted a little boy, decided that he would not deprive himself of all of the wonderful things that a father gets to do with a son. And so little Miss Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey, one of her first requirements as a young girl, operating for her father's needs, he was so proud of his beautiful daughter, was essentially to be able to speak politics. Amy, what does the article say? The war in Russia and China and the Ukraine. Russia and China on opposite sides? No, my daddy, they're on the same side on this particular issue, and they're very much working to free China from oppression. Amy, who's going to win this war? Well, Dad, I don't know, but I can tell you that Russia has a lot of military, and I'm putting my money on the Russian-Chinese alliance. Amy, just because people have a lot of resources, does that mean they're going to win a war? Good question, Dad. I'll get back to you. That was 7, 8 years old Amy. She was learning the art of articulation to hold her own in the face of men. So she already grew up before she met the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey in 1917 in Harlem, the same year he stepped foot in Harlem. She already met him with a set of tools that just absolutely intrigued him. And so one day, after hearing one of his amazing oratory gifts after a presentation that he did at a church or some establishment back in Harlem, she had an opportunity to approach him. And so she goes up to the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey and she gives him a great sense of accomplishment. She compliments him for his amazing things. And then she starts drilling the brother. So I want to know a little bit more about how this plan will work out for the people in the long run. So how is your aims going to work considering the economic conditions and the disparities? So she's just drilling him and he's intrigued. Y'all. And so he says, you know what, Queen, let's do this. There's a lot of people that I need to see here right now. I want you to come to my office. I'll show you the office. I'll give you a tour, and we can continue this conversation where I can answer each and every one of your questions. Because how often did he have a woman challenging him in this kind of way. And so she took him up on that offer. And she went to his office and she met him. And oh my God, was she mortified. The mess that was everywhere. Papers all out of order. Are you showing me checks that have been opened and left on the record? I see cash there. Is this a membership application where a person's private information is just out in the open? And what in the world is this? So he looks at her. He lets her do her diatribe of how unorganized and unprofessional and how completely disorganized his whole operation is, and making powerful suggestions that he could easily take and give to his consultant. And he said, Amy, I don't have anyone with the skills to do it. Why don't you come and fill the void? Oh. So Amy realizes she's put herself in a little bit of a predicament, and so she finds herself having to force the faith, right? So she's pointed out all these things, and she's claiming to be a race woman like he is, and so now she has to show and prove. So she puts up, instead she doesn't shut up, she puts up. And so what ends up happening was Amy and Jacques Garvey comes into that office on the first afternoon, and she starts organizing all of the document files, and she starts doing all of the things that would be required. And she actually suggests to him, you know, there's something called a system, if you will. And in this system, there's a hierarchy, a chain of command, or a chain of custody for the lawyers in the room, or a control, cash control for the accountants in the room. You shouldn't really be handling any of the cash, Mr. Garvey. I would love to be freed of that, Amy, but I have to look at all these reports. And she's like, and really, that's all you should be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and implement a system here. Well, where did you learn this, Amy? Well, when I finished school, you know, I went to almost what we consider today a college level education, which was quite unusual for a young lady in the 1920s, right? And so Mother Amy is explaining to him these amazing credentials she has, and that's before she even gets to the part where she worked in a law firm and literally mastered everything from the management of the law firm all the way to its practice of insurance. And of course, the way she was able to get into the law firm was the fact that her father passed away and left an estate that needed to be administered. And the mother needed help administering it. And the family lawyer looked at Amy with her secretarial skills, her typing skills, that she was able to convince her father to let her take typing because he wanted her to take music. So she learned the piano like every young lady should of her class. And she learned all of these amazing etiquette things. But her father wanted her to become a nurse. But she had other plans because he had already instilled in her this powerful sense of political astuteness. How could you tell that now, Dad? Well, when the lawyer first presented the idea, her father said, over my dead body. Will my beautiful, precious daughter ever work in a law firm full of groping, cursing, smoking men? And so the opportunity was almost lost to her. A critical life skill that would transform the way the UNIA worked, and that would allow her to develop a skill set that would literally become the defense that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey used in court during his trial for being falsely accused of a federal offense of mail fraud. Okay? Now, why is this important? Because while the federal agencies at the time, it wasn't a central intelligence agency at that time, but it was certainly developing because a foreign threat, a Jamaican man, who was putting ships on American shores and uniting people around the globe around a one God, one aim, one destiny, principle, morale, fighting against colonialism. Oh, there was definitely a need for a central intelligence agency that would be run by a man by the name of J. Edgar Hoover. But His immediate threat was a man by the name of attorney Edwin Kilpatrick, who was the attorney general who was responsible for monitoring, observing, and undermining everything that took place in the UNIA in Harlem and elsewhere. And so this is important because what affects him affects her. Now, mind you, she's at this point just the personal secretary. She doesn't even work for the UNIA. Let's get that clear. She is his eyes, his ears, his nose, and his mouth. She is the person who keeps him in order so he can be an effective leader. Okay? It wasn't later on that she became the secretary of the UNIA and more of an active role, actually stepping into his shoes, as she refers to herself as his natural successor. Despite him not endorsing her to become the official president in his absence or an interim president. We'll talk about that later. But that as the natural successor, both in his life and afterwards, Queen Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey came with a powerful set of skills that allow her to own certain attributes to this day. And one of those attributes is not, don't you dare refer to this woman ever again as the second wife of Marcus Messiah Garvey. It is not appropriate to refer to a woman who is as skilled and as intelligent and as powerful and legal. When I say Adam Clayton Powell, when I say Dr. George Washington Carver, when I say to you Nnamdi Azikiwe, when I say to you President Kwame Nkrumah, when I say to you W.E.B. Du Bois, when I say to you Mahatma Gandhi, you heard all these names before, but do you know a central connection to them is a woman by the name of Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey? The world did not move without Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. And something to consider, it kept moving in the absence of her husband physically, whether he was alive, in prison, or when the Most High called him back home. It was Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey who kept his work, his legacy, and in essence, his story alive. So we need to give that woman her proper respect due. So you can call her some things. You can call her the archivist, for it was her idea to put together a collection of all of his speeches and every article that had been written about him, good or bad, every time he spoke, and even sometimes his notes that she oftentimes edited. She was collecting all of these, and then she decided, this is too much for me to have to myself. I must share this with the world. And so she put together the first volumes of Philosophies and Opinions, Volume 1, at her own volition, not being asked, just because she wanted to share her husband with you. Can we give her a round of applause? Yeah. Interestingly enough, she should also be called an author, because an independent thinker must produce an independent work. And one of her first and most critical independent works was a book by the name of Garvey and Garveyism. And from that book alone, you can get 18 courses of study on politics, religion, economics, global world relationships, racism, slavery, gender issues, spiritual issues, social issues, like why do pastors have to have so many churches? It was an issue for her. She critiqued everybody from Winston Churchill to Theodore Roosevelt. There was nobody who could escape the wrath of Queen Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey, and especially if you were the enemy of her husband. And so this system that she put in place required such an in-depth process. So by the time a letter got in the mailbox of the UNIA headquarters in New York, all the way up until the time that check or that letter was going to actually make its way into the bank account, there were about 18 steps that she put those poor people through. And Marcus Messiah Garvey, her boss at the time, was not a single member of anyone until the very end. And even at that point, he said, Amy, I'm really busy with all this work, traveling and raising money. Can you at least do the final report review for me? So she ended up taking on that role as well. He was almost absolutely, completely absolved from having any relationship with the cash. Okay? So when the issue of him being in control of the money came up, his defense was already in place and it was documented because she had stamps. How did she know? Because she had systems of control that she had already put in place because she was doing it at the law firm. And so she came with a set of skills. She came with an organizational development mind, and she transformed the way people did business in the UNIA, which was so vulnerable that people who were put into position to disrupt the organization's achievements and people who were just natural opportunists had a really difficult time dealing with Miss Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey running around the office, ponytail flying behind her head, telling people where to go, what to do, and how to do it. Can you imagine? You've been doing this for 3 years, and here comes little Miss Law Firm experience telling you that you don't get to deposit the check or the cash anymore, that you've got to sign it over after filling out a register over to the next person in the hierarchy. This was very problematic for someone who wanted to steal money, like a certain person did. In fact, it was such a dangerous position for her that she had a confrontation because it was only a matter of moments, a matter of seconds, a matter of minutes, a matter of days and weeks before she would actually catch one of the chief culprits. And come to find out, this man, every time a check for 300 came in, he would siphon off 150. Every time a check for 500 came in, he'd take about 250. It was impossible to track. The organization was so disorganized and disabled. And so this system changed everything, and it created her as the chief enemy. And if you think the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey had enemies, well, you will find out that the woman who spoke of in Garvey and Garveyism, which is almost difficult to realize is her writing, because she realizes that most of the eggheads of her day wouldn't read Garvey and Garveyism because it was written by a woman. And so you won't even realize that she's entered this space until page 33 of Garvey and Garveyism, the first time she says I. And I have to admit, I was guilty because I had been reading and I was thinking subconsciously, oh, this is still Toni Martin talking, or this is John Henry Clark, or maybe this is one of the sons, but perhaps even Marcus Messiah Garvey himself, the honorable one. But I never in a million years thought that those first 33 pages, this pure intellectual history, these insights about the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's life, all of this insight about the world, the state of global politics, all of this powerful information, there is no way that the second wife, as you all like to call her, of Marcus Messiah Garvey was involved, but then she introduces herself for the first time on page 33. She says, I. And then I go back to the first 32 pages and I'm like, well, who the heck was that? And who was I? And so this is how she introduces herself, because she's living in a world full of men. In fact, she told the Honorable W.E.B. Du Bois, honorable in some respects, if you will, depending on your ideology and discipline. She said to him one day, after sending him a letter, because he had invited her to be a participant, an active role in the 5th Pan-African Congress, which was a huge deal for her. She was going to be one of the chief organizers. And so this was for the first time. This is after her husband's death, because, you know, the W.E.B. Du Bois that was alive when her husband was alive would have never been in the same room without there being total World War IV. And so it was after the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's death that she said his spirit began to talk to me. She said, Chief told me to go and speak to W.E.B. Du Bois. Chief beckons my soul. Chief is the one pushing me on to get this done. Chief is, this is what she referred to her husband as Chief, and he called her Moopsie. So when he would come home in the evenings, poor man, after a long day's work, he'd think he'd get to cuddle up with his little lady and have a good night's rest now. That was when she shut the bedroom door and handed him 15 different international newspapers and drilled him and pointed out for him all of the issues that he needed to be cognizant of when he gave his speeches. There was no rest for the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. There was no desire to enter the bedroom. And sometimes he would say, you know, Amy, just tell me what I should know. And so she would point it out. And sometimes they would argue, and sometimes she would win the argument. And so her articles and her speeches and her insights, and sometimes she edited some of his works, although he thought she was a little too what you guys would call today bougie. And so he said, Amy, don't take out all my fluffery. Because she thought some of the stuff he was saying was so superfluous. And he said, don't take it out. I'm talking to people who are not accustomed to high speech. Okay? And so these were this powerful divine balance between the masculine and the feminine, the convergence of intellectual. We're not talking about a hierarchy of intellect. We're talking about equals intellectually, okay? And so much so that Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques articles, some of which would kind of upset some people today. You heard how critical she was of the men, right? Her husband saw those articles and he said, if I didn't approve Amy, they wouldn't be published. And so whatever she was saying, he was endorsing it 110%. Okay? He had the same issues with many Black men during the time and many Black women. In fact, this room, I wish would be full of Black women ready to pay homage to her. But I'm not surprised, because just like when Mother Amy Jacques Garvey was alive, begging her sisters to contribute articles or contribute something, even if it wasn't well written like an article, just send me your thoughts. We must show Black men that we can think, that we care about politics and issues and social, that we're not just relegated to the kitchen. Like many of the women's pages of the time, it was devoted to the color of curtains, the beautiful design of the hair and flower design. So she didn't have none of that foolishness in her women's page. She wanted to know what we are going to be doing in the world and how we're going to survive the world, and are we going to eat, and can we improve the quality of our eating, and what about where we fit within the world's hierarchy. So this was a woman's place as far as she was concerned, and beyond. So much so that when the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey found himself incarcerated and suddenly cut off, the vocal cords of the Black community was suddenly cut off from direct access with his people. But you know what he did? He just plugged in his what do you call it? The cell phone, the cell phone things today that allow you to amplify your voice. He plugged in one of his USB devices into Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey, and he had that woman crisscrossing this entire nation. Memphis, Tennessee, South carolina, North Carolina, Louisiana, all on railroad, oftentimes by herself, but always with her handy gun. Can we get Ida B. Wells in the room? Now, why did she have to get a gun? Well, remember the system that she created? Well, the young man who she caught, and she caught him red-handed. So she goes to him and she challenges him. She's a different kind of woman. You know, most of us would have just went to the manager first, right? And said, no, she don't challenge him. She said, excuse me, sir. Can you explain to me why this is short by $300? And he says, what you mean, Amy? Go put yourself in your place, little girl. And she says, oh, no. The evidence shown here, we have this deposit for this amount, and now it's short, and you were the last person in the chain of custody, and I'm going to report you right now. You know, he said, if you don't get your bony little, I'm going to throw you down the stairs. And so in Garvey and Garveyism, when you're reading about the person, I had to get a gun because he threatened to throw me down the stairs.
If anyone parked in the parking lot that's adjacent to here, you have to move your car because it's going to be locked in. So if anyone parked in that parking lot, it's going to be locked in. All right, that's it.
Thank you. I needed that water break. And so, yeah, he threatened to throw her down the stairs. And it was at that point that she realized, I can't be walking around here without my self-defense. And so Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey acquired herself a gun. And that gun accompanied her on many of the lonely travel plans that she had with her husband, sometimes without thought for her health and well-being, because every 2 weeks she was in Atlanta while still living in New York, in Atlanta. And she said sometimes she would have to go to him and give him some good news and lift up his spirit, and she had to pour it on good because he was in such a horrible mood. Can you imagine this spirit being in that kind of closed environment when you're accustomed to freedom, knowing that you've got a certain amount of time to achieve a certain amount of work? And so she would come here and she would shower on good news. Oh, and the branch in Boston and the branch in Peru, and oh, everything is going, Marcus, everything is going to be fine. Oh. And so she would lift up his spirits and she would buy him things and have it sent. It was very different back then. In fact, one of my favorite revelations is a powerful story about once the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, once he got indicted and he has his trial, and then there's this incident where he's actually been convicted, and all they know is that there's a particular day that he is supposed to be moved from Harlem, New York, down to the Tombs prison in Atlanta, right? This is an incredible story. It's almost epic, right? It's the setup for a powerful movie opening scene. So all of the UNIA is on nerves. Like the vocal cords of the Black race, the Messiah of the Black race is going to be taken away from us. He might be killed. We don't know. He's in the hands of the enemy. And he's going to be taken out of New York. Now, this is a visceral feeling of we're removing him from his base. He's not accessible. We can't visit him in prison. He's moving to Atlanta. And all they know is that he cannot be on that rail train by himself. How they're going to do it, nobody knows. Well, this is such a powerful revelation about what life was like for Black folk at that time, how organized, how bold, how daring people were. So it's also a testament to how times have changed, right? Because people didn't have such a sophisticated system of secrecy and a web of underground, tunnels where they would usher in airplanes that, it was not that accessible for our government agencies to move without being aware of. And so they have this network together. And on this particular day, somehow, while Mother Amy Jacques Garvey is in their apartment with the closest and most trusted UNIA members, and they know that he's being moved today, but nobody knows what time and nobody knows what the railway is going to be. So Mother Amy is in her apartment. She's pacing back and forth. She's worried to death. She's thinking, what's going to happen to the UNIA? What about me? What's going to happen to the funds? Where am I going to get money from to raise for him? She's almost out of her mind. The hands are shaking. What's it going to be like? How am I going to access him? What's going to happen to him? Will he die? Who's going to take over the UNIA? All of these questions are in her head. And the people in the office, they're prepared to go. They don't know how they're going to go, and they don't know what to expect. But they're all in this apartment, and they're passing sandwiches around. Mother Amy can't eat. Her stomach is like bubbling, and she's going to vomit any minute now. If they take this man and she doesn't know where he's going and can't access him, what life will be like? Everything is potentially on the line here. And so at this particular moment, somehow a call comes in. And during this call, they're told by a Pullman porter, perhaps, that word has gotten to him that someone who works in the jail system has heard that a certain train date and time has been established, and that the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey will be leaving today at this particular time on this particular train. It is unbelievable. So all of a sudden, Mother Amy Jacques Garvey is thrust out of her coma of trance that she's in, and somebody throws on her overcoat over her. They're pushing her out the door. Somebody tosses her bag into her hand. She's frazzled. She doesn't know what's going on. It's a mess. The coat's on her back, and people are rushing and hustling down the stairs. They don't even have time to take the elevator. It's time to go. So they rush down the stairs. There's a car waiting outside. They zoom into the car. They get to the railway. They run to the railway, and they see a train. The train is surrounded by cops. People are behaving strangely. This must be the train. Suddenly, someone in a car way down there sends a signal. The two men that are with her, they rush her. They're running full speed ahead. The train is going, and poor Mother Amy in her heels and a little coat and a little bag with cash in her hand and this bag in the other hand, and they're just running. And at some point, they get to this car, and the two men thrust her onto the door, and she gets there, and the man pulls her, and he puts her in a seat. And the railway worker comes up to her and says, "Ma'am, you can't be here." And she says, "Nothing. She plays dumb. And he says, ma'am, you can't be here. She's like, mute. Oh, this crazy lady. And he leaves. And then suddenly she sees it. His hat. And all of a sudden, a head turns around and a big smile is on the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's face. He can't believe it. Somehow, his wife, Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey, has made it on the exact rail train that he is on. And it was absolutely epic. And he knew that he was going to be okay. Can we get a round of applause for the Black UNI? Hey! I mean, this is an incredible feat because we're talking about the most powerful government in the world, arguably housing the body of the most powerful Black man in the world, and the most powerful Black woman in the world is right on there with him, uninvited. And so these are the type of miraculous cinematic events that were taking place in the 1920s that we are almost absolutely clueless about, that none of our cinematic movie authors and publishers, and they haven't even tapped into the miraculous history that is Garvey and Garveyism. But what's interesting is that while the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, undoubtedly, even Dr. King said it himself, that he represents the vocal cords of the Black race. Well, if that's the truth, and it is, then it should also be noted that while he was in prison and after his death, that Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey was the vocal cords of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and therefore the vocal cords of the entire African race. And so she took no displeasure in stepping into the shoes, as she referred to herself as his natural successor. And there was no topic. Remember I talked to you about her early childhood where she was very affluent in global politics. It was one of the things that absolutely intrigued the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey about her, right? Well, in 1927, now I want you to talk about relevance, right? When you look at the headlines today, I want you to hear and think about what she's about to tell you that's occurring on February the 5th in this particular article. This is the global temperature of the world, and it looks like war. And in fact, the scope and the reach of the UNIA, particularly the philosophy of Africa for the Africans, also meant Asia for the Asiatics. And guess who was listening? The powers in China who were tired of oppression by the European colonialists, and they had put up and raised war using, I'll let Mother Amy tell you, it takes some big physical demonstration to make some Negroes appreciate the necessity of and worthiness of the program of Garveyism. The Chinese War, now being waged, has done it. 10 years ago, when Marcus Garvey started his crusade and informed a warring world that peace could only be brought about when each race, group, and nation learned to respect the rights of the other. And that as Europe had claimed Europe as the exclusive possession, so should Asia be for the Asiatics and Africa for the Africans. He was laughed at by some Negroes and dubbed a dangerous man by European land grabbers. Today, the slogan, hundreds of years of prayers and petitions, today the slogan, Asia for the Asiatics, created by a Black man, is the war cry of millions of oppressed Chinese who are letting Europeans know and feel that their home is in Europe, unless they are willing to be governed by the Chinese. Hundreds of years of prayers, petitions, and appeals made no impression on the powerful nations of Europe who were busy exploiting China. But less than 1 year of fighting made the decision to leave China alone to work out her own destiny. In an article under the caption, "Wanted, Fight for It," Mr. Arthur Brisbane of Hearst Publications writes, "If you want anything in selfish civilization, fight for it." China started fighting, and Europe suddenly becomes polite. China has learned what China has learned what Africa is now learning, that what is worth living for is worth dying for. But Africa is not asleep. She is in the organization period, uniting her tribes, linking hand with her scattered children in all parts of the world, educating them for the great task of self-government, and instilling in their minds the love of race and the love of country. It is a great task, but once the task is done, the battle will be comparatively easy. For what human forces could be successful in defeating 400 million well-trained Negroes? They had better sense than to try such an unequal conflict. They would yield as gracefully as they yielded to the Chinese. Africa will be redeemed, perhaps without the shedding of blood. But in the meantime, Africa bides her time, and from the ocean strand, o'er jungle, mountain, vale, and mead, the sweet word unity will speed on wings of wind, and woo her fretful folk into one dream, one heart, one hope, and yet again they'll claim their sacred right to rule their self apart from the alien right. But if once more the pale-faced man shall say, not yet, thou backward race, still thine to pay, I quake to think how swore the odds shall hurl thundering terrors at a grasping world when Africa awakes. That was Africa Bides Her Time, written October 25th, 1927. Now, can you imagine that those same issues could read right in today's headlines? China-Russia alliance. Russia wishes China well, she said. And so, interestingly enough, 100 years ago, almost to the date, we find ourselves in this great wheel of fate where the global world powers are once again restructuring themselves. And right again, Mother Euphemia Jacques Garvey is here with a relevant message, a message about nuclear war, because she even talks about nuclear war back then, saying that if war breaks out and the world powers detonate a nuclear bomb, all people, white or black, will have to get to safe destinations where there is no fallout. So the topics that they were talking about in 1927 are happening right now, but we are not talking about them intelligently. We're so trapped in the conversations of dating and dancing and dining that we're missing the important, relevant issues that are going to impact every African person in this room today. And it will be so devastating because you have not been psychologically, emotionally, and physically equipped to deal with the economic devastation that comes from war. But the people in 1927, now I want to ask for some license. Because I know in this politically correct age where there's no more murder, but there is unaliving people, and there's no more race, there are colors, right? That some of the language will offend us. Yeah, and so I want to put your position in the mind of someone who was alive in the 1920s. Because there were two issues that were on everyone's mind, and it was race and control, and that's it. Everybody was concerned about race, not racism, about race. Where the races were going to be in position to one another. So much so that in Garvey and Garveyism, we had the ability to glean that in the early 1920s and mid-1920s, colleges and universities, astute ones, were offering and threatening to offer, if you will, courses on the art of lynching. The smell and the scent of slavery and the Civil War were so fresh in the minds that people only knew three races: the black one, the white one, and the yellow one. So give her a little license when she's articulating the challenges of the time, because to be black and called black was a chief honor, because the primary term was the N-word, okay? And I'm not talking about Negro. So this was in the colleges. In fact, there was an aristocratic magazine that offered was propositioning that they bring back slavery, that they reinstitute slavery. These were conversations that folk were having daily. was no punches being pulled. So when you hear her talking about race and white and yellow and black and all of these issues, that was the language of the day. And it was not considered alarming. It was just like you talked about Uber. It didn't offend anyone because everyone knew where their position was and what needed to be done to get out of it or to maintain it. So give her a little license, because she was a very interesting woman, extremely well read. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting was her contributions to the topic of scientific racial theory. In fact, she had something to say on my birthday in 1926. She wrote an article called "Each Race Sees Beauty in Itself." And would you like to hear it?
Yes.
It's very interesting. And again, give some license for the time, right? Because we're talking about the science of the day and the language of the day, all right? Okay. No, and if you do find offense, don't blame me. I'm just delivering the message. This is just history, okay? The Bible teaches that God made man in his own image and likeness. And through scientific deduction, we learn that differences in man's pigmentation and hair are caused largely through the influence of climatic variation. In other words, God or nature was kind to the black man when, in apportioning him to the regions of Africa, he mixed him with black skin and frizzled hair, which enables him to withstand the heat of even equatorial Africa. The white man's pale pigmentation is essential for him to live in the frigid zone of the earth, and his straight long hair keeps his head warm. The yellow and brown peoples are made for the temperate zone. Thus, the different distinct racial physiognomy is not a mistake on God's part, but was intended for the good of all. But the white man, in his arrogance, believes that all beauty begins and ends with his race. And by every conceivable means of propaganda, he endeavors to make others believe likewise. His religious preachments reek of such propaganda when he paints a Christ as a white man, surrounded by little white angels with white wings, and takes these pictures into foreign lands and tells black, yellow, and brown heathen about a white God sitting on a white throne. It is no wonder that Christianity, as taught by white men, has failed to impress Africa and Asiatics as it should. Because they argue that if God is a big white man, he could not be a good spiritual father to them, as he would naturally have the same double-dealing traits of the white missionaries who teach them to sing, "Take all the world, but give me Jesus," while these same messengers of God rob them of their land and minerals. Yellow men also see beauty in their own race and glorify their own type on the canvas and by the printed word. The following, listen to it. The following are the impressions of a cultured Chinese woman who saw white people for the first time. Quote, "The door suddenly opened, and a tall male foreign devil stood there, smiling all across his face. I know that he was a man because he wore clothes like my husband's, but he was taller than my husband, and to my horror, instead of being covered, his head with human hair, black and straight like other people, had on a fuzzy red wool. His eyes were blue, and his nose rose up like a mountain from the middle of his face. Oh, what fright to behold, more hideous than the God of the North in the temple." The brown man molds his God in his own likeness and thinks his women the most beautiful on earth, in so much as he tries to keep her from the gaze of the world and often imposes the death penalty for intermarriage. The black man, in his native habitat, is also proud of his type. Africans in Africa believe that black denotes something beautiful, something genuine. They see in black the symbol of strength, and their slogan is "the blacker the better." Unfortunately, Negroes who are descendants of African slaves, who were brought to the Western Hemisphere hundreds of years ago, being overshadowed in the white man's environment, have swallowed his propaganda of white superiority, and in his blindness, many have become so dissatisfied with themselves that they have straightened their hair and bleached their skins in a mad effort to look white, and thereby reach perfection, as they thought. But through the efforts of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, under the leadership of Marcus Garvey, Negroes have learned to see black and glorify their type. God is a spirit, but when he is visualized by Negroes, he takes on the form of a black man. For in the worship of God, who looks like us, we worship and respect our black ideal. We become satisfied with ourselves as black people. Being satisfied with our type, we become proud of our race, grateful to our Creator, and the impetus grows in us to carry out the divine injunction, ye are the lords of creation. That was each race sees beauty in itself. And I don't know how much time I have. What's the time check? Okay. So this is just a synopsis of what it was to be in the presence of the dynamic, majestic, honorable, intelligent, supremely gifted, well-connected orchestrator of global world events, Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey. So if nothing else, put some respect on her name, and don't be referring to her no more as the second wife of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. Thank you so much.
So we have come to the end of the program. Can we get Sheila Brown another round of applause, please? Unfortunately, we don't have that much time for Q&A, but if we can get just a few impressions from the audience or comments. I heard a wow. Okay, I'm gonna give it to you.
Quick comment. I'd just like to say, Ms. Brown, thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'd just like to say it's so wonderful and so great that you take on this responsibility, because we often hear the term that behind every great man there's a great woman, you know. But to bring this to life, and it just shows how our indoctrination has led us to have our women and allow our women, great women, to be in the shadows like this. And it's really important because so many of us women are out here, like all these beautiful young ladies here, who have that power to drive, to be the driving force behind the movement of this kind of power, you know. And like you said too, that we're not hearing anything about it. We hear Roots and we got other stories, Django or whatever, but we don't hear the story about the Honorable Garveys, you know. And I really give thanks that you took this responsibility to do this. It's very honorable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. It left a really great impression. Actually, I'm like studying a lot of Frederick Douglass, looking at his archives, looking at his speeches. So like having someone like you that's reading something that during that time period brings it to life for me. And I just really enjoyed it so much. And thank you for doing that. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't even know. So awesome to have you doing that.
It was a pleasure watching you go from your computer screen to shifting your body.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank you along with others for helping to bring a voice to talk about the warrior women of past, present, and future. And we need to hear more about them. Somebody mentioned Frederick Douglass, his wife Anne, I understand, was a very strong fortitude and the energy behind these folks is very, very important. And not to minimize Amy at all, but I think it was Ann, all these A names. Told Frederick Douglass she had to get him out of being enslaved, or else she wasn't going to marry, an enslaved man. I mean, that in itself is amazing. She's like, hey, we get you up out of here because we ain't doing this again. And so making sure that this Amy, and I'm just interested, they were both named Amy, both of his wives, they were very, very powerful people to help continue his legacy. So that's important.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that insight. And yes, Mama Anna Marie Douglas was a force to be reckoned with as well.
I want to thank you for the program itself, and I know people will probably talk about how it was the members of the UNIA that got her out of that office onto the plane or onto the train, but it was the Pullman porter that actually got the information to those people. So I thank them. I thank the Pullman porter for getting that information out there.
It was a powerful network.
Part of the puzzle,
A very, very powerful network of trust.
I know we can't ask any questions. Okay. Keep it short. Okay. You mentioned there aren't a lot of documentaries or visuals that can portray this message. Have you thought about taking it on?
Yeah, well, yes, I would love to. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Okay.
would love to. I'm sure there are people far more qualified, but even
That part. Yeah. You got it.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, Asante Sana, thank you for, using your voice just as she did to give us this message, continue the legacy and step into, like a part of your birthright to give us this message, highlight her, honor her, use your gifts to, just continue to share the message and put it in the hearts of, people here and wherever else you go. So thank you for that. Please continue the legacy and share your gifts and her knowledge.
It's her time, right? Would you agree? And she's so relevant. You can literally pull an article out from her 100 years ago and it'll read like today's headline.
Yeah.
The issues around I don't know if you caught it, but even around the issues that we're now having around foundational Black versus international Africans, right? She said, white women are rallying their forces and uniting regardless of national boundaries. So these are all topics that have been addressed before, but because we're so arrogant and we're so much smarter than our ancestors that we don't think that, we need to go back and study what has already been provided, because we'll see the clues and the solution. And in fact, to what you were saying, Mama, is interesting because not just in the shadows, but almost obsolete, right? Like I've begged sometimes to be a part of UNIA presentations where they're honoring the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, and they got 4 men lined up, and they all quoting her diary, right? The Garveyism is her diary. You don't know anything about his mother. You don't know about the funeral, the burial in the tomb. You don't know about the sign, the conversations about what happened with his father and his mother, about the library, about the potential for emotional neglect. He didn't write that about himself. That was a conversation he had with his confidant and wife, and she shared that with you. You quote her when you talk about, the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey sat in his room and he thought to himself, where is the Black man's big men of renown? Where is his thing? That was a question that he asked, and he shared it with his wife. Let's be very clear. You're reading the diary of a woman who just so happened to be in your favor, a political analyst, an archivist, an author, a global leader, a speaker, and someone who is profoundly as deeply in love with African liberation as I've had so many debates with African men when I say she was a financier of the UNIA, because what the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey could not get from the nation financially, he literally took it out of his wife's womb. And what I'm referring to is every woman, every mother, every wife is entitled to an estate, a house, a home, some sense of continuity in the event of your absence. Not Queen Mother Amy Euphemia Chase Garvey. Her home was put up. Everything she owned was put up for a nation, and she tolerated it because she was just as much, if not more, nation and race oriented as he was. He was with the right one, trust me, because when he was with the wrong one, he ended up being testified against with the cohort of FBI at the time because he hurt someone's feelings. So if you are with the wrong sister, and no disrespect, every woman is entitled to her beautiful things. But when you get one like Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey, you better put some respect on her name because it's a different breed. And even people to suggest that when she reveals some of her pain in very subtle ways and very respectfully being honest, because this book, Garvey and Garveyism, it's not just a book about historical events. It is, ladies, a secret code for you to learn how to survive the African liberation movement and keep your sanity and not become a traitor to your race because you're so outraged by his conduct. There's a code in the book, and men can't handle it, so I try not to even bring it up because I almost have to walk around with a gun with some of these brothers from the UNI. But she did everything she said out of compassion and love. And if you cannot at least write about your experience so that it can be a lesson for the young ones to learn from and study this family guide that she left us in Garvey and Garveyism, where she's always talking about this unfair dynamic where you get to exert your will and no consideration for your women, right? And so this new soft life, and I love it, that this new trend, I want the soft life, I love the soft life. And so every time I would do a post making some statements about something she may have said about women deserve to work, women, see, you are walking into the soft life with some stripes have already been worn by some other women. Because you can be in the soft life, but you can also walk into a bank and open your own bank account. This was not so for the women of the 18th and early 19th century, right? So your soft life is earned because there's some protections in place that was earned off of the backs of people like Maria Stewart, the first Black woman who stood up and said, Black man, the time has come for you to stand up and fight against slavery. And it was astoundingly rejected for a Black woman. It's hard to hear from a Black man, but a Black woman is going to tell us to strengthen our knees and move forward. She was the counterpart, although not the wife, of the man you know by the name of David Walker. She was the shadow of David Walker, who kept his legacy alive after David Walker's appeal put out and got him killed. She was his vocal cords in carrying on the message. So we come from a legacy of uncelebrated women who have been lost in history on account of the deliberate refusal to embrace them because their message was so strong. But it was a necessary message. And it propels us to this day because it was vital. And so add Mother Amy Euphemia Jacques Garvey to the ranks. And in fact, she was so distraught by the way the UNIA was running at a certain point that she created her own organization. Many of you have never heard of it. It was called Garvey's African Communities League. Because what she began to realize was that the UNIA was a series of sects. And while she wanted to be affiliated, she could not be limited to it because the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's spirit, being free from its oppression, has enabled her to take her political message of his journey outward to a greater group. And so those who were once enemies can now become allies. And she embraced the various disciplines and manifestations of African liberation. You could be with Adam Clayton Powell's group. You could be with W.E.B. Du Bois' group. Her job now was the great thread. She was the yeast. She was spreading the message of race nationalism through all of the various organizations and keeping his message of nationalism alive. And she got to see it through Nnamdi Azikiwe and Kwame Nkrumah, and she got to still bread. And I don't know if you realize this, but a part of this journey for me took me to Sweden to continue her work because she wanted so desperately to go to London and participate in the 5th Pan-African Congress. There was an Amy there, but it wasn't Amy Jacques Garvey. It was Amy Ashwood Garvey, which made her blood boil, because you guys don't realize it at the time that the thickness between the Honorable Marcus Messiah and Amy Ashwood Garvey was so toxic that Mother Amy Ashwood, in her rightful anger, I'm sure, would even go around impersonating in Africa that she was the mother of Marcus Garvey Jr. and Julius Garvey. So this was a real nasty challenge, so much so that she hated her name at this point, and she started just call me A.J. Garvey, because she didn't even want to be referred to as Amy. And so you all insult her even more by referring to her at the first title as the second wife, with a woman who has done so much. So just keep that in mind when you put some, referring to her. You got so many titles: the archivist, the author, the speaker, the political analyst, the editor. All these titles, use any one of them, but don't refer to her on the first instance as the second wife of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, please.
What was the name of that organization?
Garvey's African Communities League. It didn't take off the way she wanted it to, but it was her way of saying, I will honor my husband's desire to not be in leadership of the UNIA. He did not want her to become the president while he was alive. We don't know how he felt afterwards, but there was so much confrontation between her. We'll just refer to him as Mr. Stewart, and who one of her chief issues was that he was supposed to raise $600 to bring the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey's coffin from Europe into Jamaica, and she never saw that money. So it was a lot of times money issues. It was a lot of times just respect, trying to refer to her as a little lady, and she would never try to outstep her place in our society by taking on the role of a leader. She was the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey in his absence, no question about it. It was not any one of them that he sent crisscrossing a country like Parchi. It was not any one of them. They all worked together, make no mistake about it, but she was a force to be reckoned with unto itself, and without her, we would not have what we have to this very day. That's all I want to say. Considering the time, there's so much more to share, but thank you so much for this.
Hopefully there'll be a part 2. Yeah. Y'all come back for that, clap for that. Yeah. Really quickly, with Sheila Brown, beyond being a voice for the wisdom of the ancestors, she really is about Black people thriving and surviving. Can you tell us very briefly about the other projects you have going and how people can reach you?
Thank you so much for that opportunity. I kind of alluded to it when I talked about Mother Amy Garvey and the Chinese-Russian alliance and the war that literally the Marcus Messiah Garvey was responsible for, right? But she talks about nuclear war and the fallout and what we have to do. They were deeply concerned about preparing their people, and I would argue that if they were here today, that would be their primary discussion: the war, where we fit in it, and what we need to do about it. So, ironically, the work that I do, you can find it at SheilaBrownSpeaks.com. I'm known primarily for 3 things: Mother Amy Garvey, emergency preparedness for Black people in particular, and my work around women's wellness. And I have a book called The Divine Self-Care Strategy, which is, thank you, yes. You can hold my book up. And it's a book that celebrates the contributions that women of African descent have made to the world of health and wellness. But it's got some really beautiful, powerful stories about women and their relationship between community, their relationship between husband, their relationship with children, and most importantly, their relationship with self, their womb, their head, and their feet. So please check that out. It's sold here at Sankofa, and hopefully one day we're everywhere Black books are sold, but thank God for Sankofa, video and books. And it's always a pleasure to be here, because I used to have a bookstore right up the street called All Eyes on Egypt years ago, and I have since closed it back in 2005 to go to law school, and it's just a part of the divine journey that we're on. So thank you again for your attention, and it's always a pleasure to watch the seats go from 4 people to a nice room full of people. Sankofa always has that magical way of doing that. Thank you, family. Black girl.
Thank you.
Also, you do a lot of work with helping women with their health, helping women regain control and responsibility for their health.
Thank you. That's right, beloved. I do. And I do that through food. I lost 135 pounds naturally doing some fasting, and I'm obviously still working on my life and health. And I'm also an attorney. I don't know if you guys are, but I work a lot out of Texas, and I do a lot of antitrust work. So that's what holds my bread together. But this is my blood. This is what wakes me up in the day. And I just love talking about Mother Amy. She's just like so much interesting things to say about her. I feel like I can never say enough.
You said it's Sheila Brown Speaks?
Yeah, SheilaBrownSpeaks.com. And so whenever I'm invited to speak, I'll put that on there. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook under the same handle, Sheila Brown Speaks. And my other one is Queendom Care. It's QUEENDONQARE, but it's still pronounced care. QueendomCare.com. I'm actually an inventor now. I created a product that Howard University was able to help me acquire a patent for it at the end of last year. So. And it's also in the book too, but it's listed as patent pending. And I make women's products. So particularly, you'll find a story about vaginal steaming from an African woman's perspective through the eyes of an ancient Ethiopian princess named Dinkinesh. So, so thank you so much. I promise that's not my last word.